Hi everyone. Tonight I'm going to talk about Buddy Holly's last tour, the Winter Dance Party, scheduled to go through America's Midwest in January and February of 1959, which that's just coming on the 60th anniversary now. I became interested in this 7 or 8 years ago. I used to work for a theater and film production company, and my boss came to me with the idea to pitch a film about Buddy Holly's last tour, the one where he, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash. I let him know that I was as interested in Buddy Holly as the next person, but said, I don't think there's much of a story there. I thought that 3 people made a remarkably bad decision to go up in a 4-seat plane in the middle of a blizzard and suffered the consequence. My boss wasn't too bothered one way or the other and said, well, look into it. And now it's become a bit of an obsession. The plane that went down on February 2nd, 1959 was no doubt a tragedy, but this is more of a story of the exploitation of musicians that went on then and it still goes on today. My goal tonight is for you to hear the facts and perhaps come to the conclusion that you would have made the same decision to scramble for a seat on that fateful flight. So here's the story. Okay. So, fabulous 50s, America. What's not to love? Well, a lot. But here's a snapshot of America in the year leading up to the tour. Dwight Eisenhower was in his second term of the U.S. presidency. The Little Rock Nine. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled for the integration of African American students into public schools. Riots and protests followed. NASA, the space race. NASA was founded to be a new federal agency that would conduct all non-military space activity in response to Sputnik 1 being launched into space in 1957. And Massachusetts Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy was gearing up to be the Democratic golden boy, prepping for the 1960 presidential election. On a slightly lighter side, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army and enrolled to honor his patriotic duty. The Academy Award for Best Picture went to Bridge Over River Kwai, and baseball god Ted Williams was knocking it out of the park for the Boston Red Sox, making the unheard of salary of over $100,000 a year. Objectively, rock and roll was king. Elvis made a cool mill on that same year, but Elvis was the only one. Other rock stars of the day were doing well, but not as well as Elvis. And in the middle of the fabulous 50s, the country went into a huge recession in 1958. Automobile sales had dropped 31% since 1957, and Detroit was at 20% unemployment. But back to the tour. The guys. J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper, 28 years old. His song Chantilly Lace had been on the charts for 22 weeks in 1958, and it was the 3rd most played song on the radio that year. He was primarily an East Texan DJ, making the transition to rock star. He was out of Beaumont, Texas, on the border of Louisiana on the Gulf of Mexico. DJs were huge stars at the time, and though JP was a reserved and shy guy, his alter ego was the big, brash, hilarious Big Bopper. I love this little aside about him. In 1957, it had become a thing to have DJ marathons, where they'd see how many hours they could broadcast consecutively without sleeping. The record was 121 hours, so just a smidge over 5 days straight. So JP gave it a shot, and the station set up a big glass front studio on the main street in town that sometimes had as many as 2,000 people at any time watching. There were doctors on hand, and he was sometimes taking 10 cold showers a day during the brief break in newscasts. As of the 88th hour, his wife was helping him with an oxygen tank. In the end, he did break the record at 122 hours and 8 minutes, where he was promptly rushed to the hospital, 35 pounds lighter than when he started. So Ritchie Valens from Los Angeles, California, he was the youngest person on the tour. He'd be going out at 17 years old. He'd had 3 hits in 1958, La Bamba, Donna, and Come On, Let's Go. At this point, he didn't even have an album out yet and had never gone on any kind of tour, so he was beyond thrilled. His career would ultimately last only 8 months. And here's a photo of him and his love, Donna Ludwig, who his hit was written about. he later made fun of on the tour for not going off with groupies after the show. And okay, the man behind the glasses, Buddy Holly, a 22-year-old genius from Lubbock in western Texas who'd taken the world by storm. Buddy Holly and the Crickets had 6 songs that charted in 1958, following their 3 in 1957. They toured the country, even opening for Elvis on a number of occasions. People were in awe of him. Signing with a major label, the band headed to New York for recording and some shows. Buddy fell in love with a woman named Maria Elena, the receptionist at his record label, and proposed to her after 5 hours in the middle of their first date. He soon moved to New York to be a star and to marry Maria Elena. However, the band didn't want to move to New York with Buddy, so they broke up. As well, he was fighting with his manager, Norman Petty, about his songwriting contract. Even though he had legally got a release from that contract, Petty was not giving Buddy any money from royalties. So he found himself with a New York mortgage, a baby on the way, and flat broke. Tours Buddy had gone out with before were rather high class, with lots of bands and proper tour buses. The Everly Brothers, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, all together. The Winter Dance Party tour was arranged by Irving Feld, the head of GAC, the General Artists Corporation. It was a big outfit, but the company was regarded as a shoestring outfit headed by a pharmacist who sold records from his pharmacies and cared little about rock and roll. But he was up for doing a winter tour, so in January 1959, Buddy Holly head to Minneapolis, Wisconsin, joined by the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, Dion and the Belmonts, and Frankie Sardo. They'd done a second-rate tour with GAC through the Midwest before, but it was during the glorious summer. And seriously, it's about the most wonderful place in the world in July and August. There weren't even buses for them at the time, but that was fine during the summer. Buddy drove his brand new powder blue Lincoln convertible. He was accompanied by a DeSoto station wagon pulling a trailer with their gear. They drove happily from place to place, stopping to rent boats, to water ski, fish. But we find ourselves here, Winter Dance Party 1959, 25 dates over 25 nights in America's Midwest. There was a cold snap in the Midwest, with sometimes blizzard conditions that had already claimed 14 lives in January. Though they hadn't been treated particularly well that summer, they had no idea what they were in for. So, excuse my amateur cartography. Here are the locations of the 12 places they played before the plane crash. To give you an idea of the size of this area, it's over 430,000 square miles, so around 4 times the size of England. Logic would have it that you'd plan a tour from town to closest town, but greed, planning last minute and being very greedy, took whatever offer of dates he got from different venues, no matter the distance. So this is the route actually taken. So GAC planned the tour with no thought of geography or road conditions. Instead of a well-planned tour where they might travel 100 miles a day, they often traveled 300 plus miles overnight on two-lane rundown roads. And GAC had also accepted the lowest bid from the most shady bus companies. Most nights they were driving, seldom got to sleep in a hotel, but it started swell enough. All the bands flew to Chicago and got on a bus and drove to Minneapolis where the tour started. The bus was already giving them problems, but they figured that would be fixed soon enough. And the tour started as Wisconsin was experiencing the deadliest winter storm in decades. And excuse my affinities for my native Fahrenheit, I've tried to pay due diligence to the conversion to centigrade. They arrived to 3 below zero temperatures, which is around 19 below Celsius. It snowed 13 inches that day, and 4 people had already died just while shoveling snow. But they were having fun, played a great show, did a little dancing at an after party, and had a good night's sleep in a hotel. January 24th, next stop, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Again, off to a good tour. It was only 24 miles to Kenosha, so they arrived early and well rested, playing to a sold-out crowd of 6,000. And And a little aside, if anyone's a fan of country music, that's Waylon Jennings. He was unknown then and knew Buddy from Texas, and he came on the tour to play bass as one of the Crickets. So January 25th, on the way to Mankato, Wisconsin. This is where it starts to get shaky. They boarded what essentially was a school bus, traveling 381 miles overnight. Unlike a tour bus, there was no place to sleep. Some folk tried to sleep on the luggage racks, but it wasn't going to happen. They arrived and played. They always played. Not like any of us would have loved the cold, but also keep in mind that the Bopper and Buddy were from warm Texas and Richie was from Los Angeles, California, so weather like this was completely foreign. All of them being cashless, Valens had to phone his mother to get her to send him a winter coat to a future tour stop. So January 26, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, the guys stayed at a hotel and drove the 167 miles to their next gig. Important to note, at this point, the Big Bopper was coming down with the flu. And January 27th, Montevideo, Minnesota. Minnesota is the coldest winter state in the United States. They did a 240-mile drive that day, which at times hit the low of minus 26 degrees Fahrenheit, so minus 32 Celsius. But they were rewarded with a hotel that night, and that's Dion the Belmonts playing in that photo. January 28th, next stop, St. Paul, Minnesota. Probably the best day of the tour, especially for Richie Valens. They got to sleep in and were given a new bus to take them the 155 miles to St. Paul. The temperature made it up to minus 2 Celsius. Firstly, though, Valens got his coat in the mail. Secondly, Variety reported that day that his song Donna had hit number 4 on the charts and La Bamba was holding steady at number 17. He was widely regarded by the bands as the best guitar player they'd ever heard. And Carl Bunch, drummer for the Crickets, said, "I never met anyone with a better command of an audience than Richie." Okay. January 29th, Davenport, Iowa. This is the only known photo of the three of them. Not being in a world of iPhones and photographers not wanting to brave the weather, there are amazingly few photos of the tour. Maybe only a dozen or so exist. Slight aside about the Bopper, that day was the sad day that a DJ named Peter Tripp from New York City's WMGM broke the Bopper's broadcast record with a 200-hour sleepless broadcast. We're talking over 8 days until he was rushed to the hospital. The slight break in the Arctic weather was soon gone. Slight drizzle quickly turned to sleet. The heat started going on their bus again, and they drove the 320 miles for a 2-show night. Even in concerts, it was hard to be warm. Many of the venues had already been turned into ice skating rinks for the winter and only had wooden planks over the ice. Richie and a few others were now coming down with the flu as well. January 30, after Fort Dodge, in a 200-mile journey. 30 miles into the trip, the heat in the bus had completely stopped working, finding all 9 heaters to be frozen. At least they got 5 hours off their journey to hang out in the unexpected break in a town called Tipton. And after the show, this is where the writing was on the wall. After a packed show, Buddy sat down on the radio with local DJ and MC of the show, Bill McCullough. Buddy talked about the dread of getting back on the bus, and the DJ, who was taking flying lessons, excitedly offered to fly our star to his next destination. Buddy had also been taking flying lessons and was thrilled. As fact would have it, McCullough did not have a pilot's license that would allow him to fly him so far, but said he'd find someone to take him. But no company would take the charter, saying that flying that distance in that weather would be risky at best. January 31st. All aboard for Duluth, Michigan. It was below zero when they woke up, but that was nothing compared to the negative 31 Celsius they found in Duluth, with a forecast of negative 37 for that night. The bands were exhausted and starting to go a little mad. On the 360-mile freezing drive, Freddie Milano, one of the Belmonts, was playing around with an unloaded gun, putting it to people's heads and putting everyone on edge as he threatened to kill them. The bus driver stopped at some point and took the gun away. Arriving at the show, they were told a matinee was added for the next day, so they'd have to leave directly after the gig. And people seem to like to know that a 16-year-old Bob Dylan was in the audience that night, so there you go. I'll explain the circumstances as why the next matinee gig never happened. Less than 100 miles from Duluth, in the middle of the night, the bus died near Hurley, Wisconsin. There was absolutely no traffic passing, and they made the decision to stay with the bus, even though the temperature inside was roughly the same as the outside. They burned papers inside the bus to try to stay warm, and took their mind off things with stories and whiskey. They had piles of rank laundry to do, but had no time with the crazy travel schedule, and couldn't find people to dry clean them, and the stink made the bus almost unbearable. Finally, a truck went by, but they weren't able to flag him down. The trucker did notify the sheriff's department, saying that a group of men without hats and gloves had been standing outside a stranded bus 15 miles outside of town, life-threatening trouble. After 2 hours spent by the roadside, help showed. When the sheriff, Bob Eckhart, arrived, he stepped into the bus with flashlights, and he was greeted by a group of pale and sick young men, some huddled together under blankets. One person couldn't stand up. The one who couldn't stand, Cricket's drummer Carl Branch, was rushed to the hospital where he was admitted with frostbite. Sheriff Eckhart said, maybe the only thing that kept the group alive was the fact that they had no idea how close they were to dying. They couldn't fix the bus, so they canceled the matinee concert, but had an evening show in Green Bay. Everyone took either the train or the Greyhound to the next gig. Carl stayed in the hospital. Richie called his manager, who was gassed at the conditions, and immediately started the process of getting Valens off the tour and on a plane back to LA. So, February 2, Clear Lake, Ohio. They finally arrived there, and they played that night. Buddy Holly played drums for the Belmonts, and Richie Valens played drums for the Crickets. And they left, and another bus had been hired and was waiting for them. But at this point, Holly wasn't getting on another bus. He talked to the manager of the Surf Ballroom, Carol Anderson, to try to find a charter. No one would take them up, but on the fourth try, they found a company that would arrange a plane for $36 a person. Everyone flew into the Clear Lake area. It was so vast with so few roads at the time. Anderson even said he flew the 2.5 miles to school every day when he was 14. But he just wanted to rest and deal with everyone's laundry and have one good night's sleep. And this is the last picture of Buddy Holly ever taken. Roger Peterson, a 22-year-old pilot, agreed to fly 3 passengers to Fargo. Buddy offered the other 2 seats to his remaining bandmates. Waylon Jennings offered the Big Bopper his seat because he had such a flu. Richie Valens' flu was getting worse, and he wanted to head back to LA as soon as possible, and begged the Crickets' Tommy Alsop to at least flip a coin for the seat. After saying no repeatedly, Tommy finally said yes and lost the toss to Richie. The rest of the guys got on the bus. After a lot of teasing, Jennings' last word to Holly were, "Well, hell, I hope your old plane crashes." And he never got over that. So at about 12:55 in the morning, the Beechcraft Bonanza plane took off and crashed 7.5 miles from the airport, killing all on board. It was not until 9:30 the next morning that people started looking for the plane. The bands didn't know of the crash until they checked into the hotel in Moorhead and were told by staff. Fell from GAC was already flying in replacements to finish the tour. Most of the families of the deceased found out about the death through radio broadcasts, and Maria Elena Holly had a miscarriage 2 days later. So the cold snap ended that day, leading into weeks of weather above the freezing point. Everyone wanted to stop the tour. The remaining Crickets were promised the balance of what Buddy was owed from the tour if they finished, but they never saw any of this money. Jimmy Clanton, Frankie Avalon, and Fabian came to join for various portions of the tour. Richie Valens' first album was released the day before the tour ended, and nobody, not anyone, no one got paid for the tour. I don't know. What would you have done? So maybe tonight you'll go home and listen to American Pie a little bit differently. So to Richie Valens, J.P. Richardson, And Buddy Holly, rest in peace. And thank you.
Fabulous. Well, that's a brilliant Bavard. Thank you so much, Rachel. Now, at this point in the Bavard Bar, I throw it open to questions. So, does anybody have any questions for Rachel about Buddy Holly? One question I'm going to just start off. The record slightly off point, but the DJ broadcast record. You said it got up to 200 hours.
221.
221. Yeah. Has it been beaten?
It has been beaten.
Has it?
I mean, I think I think somebody really like it. It was a couple months later. It was like something like extraordinary, like 12 days or something like that. Wow. It's like they just. I mean, I think it got to a point where it says,
enough.
People are going to die.
Does anybody have any questions? I mean, I should have probably played American Pie as you were coming in tonight.
What happened to the film idea?
With the film idea, no one was interested.
No one was interested in
You should try Netflix again. You can get the whole series out of it.
No, but people had felt, as I had, that there was already a Buddy Holly movie made, which when you actually watch it, kind of ends right there. You know, it ends. It has them going out on this beautiful tour and then playing this new song and then dead. So that process is not. You know, I would love to do something someday. You know, but I put it on the list.
Yeah. So it's because essentially they were. I mean, the artists were exploited when that was essentially what was happening.
I mean, the fact that I think that the fact that they never got paid is it's like at least for something. But and then the guy Irving Fell had started this huge feud between everyone, saying that he had given Buddy Holly's widow all the money for her to distribute, which wouldn't have happened, and there was no proof of everywhere. But it kind of got the attention off of him for a while. So.
Sure. Any final questions for Rachel before we take a break? Yes.
Did you say Duluth was Michigan?
Yes.
Oh.
Was I wrong?
I didn't know it was Minnesota, but I could be.
I could be saying the wrong words all the time. I try to be very careful. Did I say Duluth?
It's in Michigan.
I may have, but I'm gonna have to look at my map now. It's right there.
Any other questions? Geographic or non-geographic? Yeah. Barry.
Did you ever read the crash report for the accident?
I have not. I have read reports from people who've read the reports, but the reports themselves, which were done twice, I think right then and then many years later they were re-examined. But the reports are pretty simple. There's nothing funny going on about them, but I have not read them.
Have you, Barry? No. Was that news to you in terms of the...
No, I did find them online many years ago.
Oh, wow.
And there was also a post-mortem of Buddy Holly, how he actually died in the accident. And I'm just wondering whether that was something that's been pulled offline now.
I probably think that nothing's been pulled offline.
Yeah.
But I haven't. But I haven't. They're not in my library.
Yeah.
Why would that be pulled offline? Why would that be suppressed?
Maybe his widow or somebody decided that it was not pleasant.
Any final questions? Or in which case, can we thank Rachel for a wonderful Bavard?